Everybody welcome Patrick.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for making it out here in the weather as is. The smaller group just means I can like laser in on everybody when I ask questions and be like, what do you think about this? So, yeah, it's pretty crazy being back here in the Innovation Connector where kind of our professional career started. A lot of memories in this building, a lot of late nights, a lot of coffee in the little like nook there. So it's really cool to be here and really great to connect with Ted. And thank you so much, Intersection, for inviting me. It's been really fun to kind of curate some of the knowledge that we have into a presentation, and I really appreciate the invite. So I wanted to start today by, asking, so it seems like quite a few people in the room are in marketing, right? Like you want to learn to market your book, Intersection is marketing. Like who here actually works in marketing? Okay, so most of the people in the room, right? So I want to lay out kind of like a situation that we at Devon House know very clearly, and I want to see if anybody else has experienced this, where you've got like a new client and you're super excited because maybe they're a bigger client and you've got sign off to work on a project. And they present their problem to you and you're like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is exactly the novel idea we've been working on for a long time. This is gonna be a perfect project. We've been wanting to do something like this. It's gonna be a portfolio piece. They seem really bought in. They have a great budget. And so you sign off and you get started on the project. And then through discovery and a few weeks and a few months go by, little things start to trickle in. Whether it's, the CEO has a little note on the script after the script was already supposed to be approved, or you get HR coming in with something and it's kind of like out of line with the original vision for the piece, or maybe there's a second art director that shows up after 2 weeks of vacation in Germany who now has a bunch of opinions that's not from personal experience at all. But has anybody ever experienced something like that, like in the marketing world, where by the time you get to the end of the project, it's just like a super watered down version of what you wanted it to be? And you're like, oh, this lost all of its bite. What happened? Has that happened to anybody? Is anybody willing to share, without naming any names, like a story about that?
So there's this marketing director.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've all been there. You're excited, you pitch something, it gets watered down, and you're kind of upset, right? But I think those type of situations highlight the importance of specifically curating your communication and being able to pitch your ideas effectively. If you get good at being able to pitch your ideas, one, you get better results for your client, because the more that you focus on the actual creative oomph, the better the product's gonna be. You end up making better work, and at the end of the day, you just enjoy doing that work a lot more. So that's why it's important to focus on how you pitch your ideas. So, we as creatives, we in the marketing world, we don't want to just be button pushers. We don't want to just be order takers. We want to be more creative consultants. I think that's kind of the dream for everybody, right? People come to you for your specific voice and come to you for your specific vision for something. So the question becomes, how do you get better at pitching more effectively in a way that gets the client what they need, allows you to do what you want, and you make awesome work along the way? So we're Devon House Creative. We're a boutique animation and video studio that helps organizations distill complex marketing goals down into clear, compelling visual stories that help connect and convert. And animation is a really complex process. There's a bunch of stakeholders, dozens of steps, collaborators, breaking points in the system. And so over that time, we've had to learn how to communicate really effectively to keep our clients on track and keep the projects on track. So today what I'm hoping to do is distill down some of the kind of lessons we've learned over our experience into some actionable items for you guys, because the way you communicate really, really matters, whether it's selling to a client, or whether it's convincing your boss of your worth, like getting a raise, or it's just getting buy-in from your team. So the way I'll do that is one of my friends, Brian Phillips, he's the co-founder of the Basement agency in Indianapolis. When I asked him about his success, he said that what led to it was he was 1 part right brain, 1 part left brain, and 1 part humility. And so that's kind of how I'll be structuring my talk today. So, 1 part right brain, discovery, and specifically using discovery to protect the creative. So Would anybody in the room consider themselves a salesperson? You? Do you like sales? You enjoy it? Well, that's great, yeah. For a lot of creatives in marketing, I hate to say it, but like sales is so important. It's kind of a cliche to say that sales is everything, but it really is. The way that you communicate matters a lot. And it's a skill that you can apply to many different areas of your life. So spending a little bit of time curating your communication allows you to open up a ton of possibilities, specifically in selling better work, selling more of it, and then getting emotional buy-in from your client. So one of the first things that I learned was how important it was to script what you do, especially in the discovery process. A lot of times we think that to be a salesperson, you have to be one of two things. You have to be relatively disingenuous, or you have to have some like hidden skill or talent that you're just kind of born with. And both of those can be true at points, but both of those miss the mark a little bit, because sales and selling is actually a skill that you can learn and something that you can apply to almost every element of your life. And in the end, sales allows you to open up a bunch of creative opportunities, because you're able to not just sell your ideas to clients, or not just sell to the end audience user, but sell your ideas to clients so you can do better work, bigger ideas, cooler projects. One of the things I learned is scripting it. So basically, it's not really a betrayal of your art or your process to script something out. In the discovery process, it actually protects it, because as you create a structure, it means that you're guiding the client along from the beginning, and what you're doing is you're creating emotional anchors that you can use later on, so that when they might want to pull at the reins a little bit, you can go back to that from the information you learned in the discovery process. And I think a lot of us want to believe that our work is going to speak for itself. So when somebody comes to us, they just have to trust that, like, the quality of our work. But if you just spend a little bit of time curating your communication before a discovery call, before a kickoff meeting, before anything, you're going to get unbelievable results. So a quick example is we have a product which is like a social media thought leadership package. And in the process of developing this product, we developed a discovery process that helped us both communicate and vet our clients. The way we look at it is you start with your value proposition when it comes to a product, and then you work backwards into vetting questions, and then out of those vetting questions you create discovery questions. It's almost kind of like a reverse marketing funnel, basically. So in our social media thought leadership product, which is, we come in, we shoot with people, we give them weekly video content, we put animation on stuff, it just gives them consistency. The value prop on it is that we help leaders in relationship-driven businesses, or relationship-based businesses, consistently show up online with weekly authentic video content for less than 2 hours of the time per month. So that's the value proposition. So from there, you need to create vetting questions. And the vetting questions need to be really pointed. They need to be a little bit scary. They need to be questions that are sharp enough that a lot of people are going to say no to them. And the reason you do that is, one, so that you can vet whether or not somebody's going to be a good client for you, and two, so that you can build trust, because people can tell if you're asking generic questions. Actually, when I meet with a lot of salespeople, one, because I want to learn from them, but two, because they have really broad networks. And one guy who was he was a sales coach. He was trying to sell me on his sales coaching. And so I was learning a lot from him, but he really just wanted to sell me on his sales coaching. And at the last call, we made the big pitch to me. He ended it by asking 3 questions. And he said, oh, hey, if you say yes to these 3 questions, it means that you're a good fit. And he asked me these really generic questions that almost anybody could say yes to. And I was like, that's an interesting idea. What if we came up with questions that were so pointed and so sharp that a lot of people would actually say no? How effective would that be? And it's amazing how much it helps vet people when you do this. So at the end of a proposal process, we'd ask, based off of our value proposition, are you in a relationship-driven business? Do many of your relationships live on LinkedIn? And do you believe being consistently top of mind would make an impact? For example, a couple weeks ago when I was giving this presentation to a client that had 2 different organizations that was interested, it was a really great outcome, because for one of the organizations, he was like, I can say yes confidently to all 3. And for the other one, he was like, I can say yes to one of these, but I don't know about the other 2. And I was like, that's perfect, because I want to know whether or not we're going to be able to service you in that. Then from there, you create discovery questions, which these are just questions that you'd bring up in the initial discovery call. And the great thing about well thought out discovery questions is that they simultaneously vet the people as to whether or not they're going to be a good client, but then it's really fun because during a great discovery call, by the end, people will be selling themselves on your product. So if you can work backwards from there, you see, tell me about yourself and your business, what outcome you're expecting to receive, what financial benefit, that's, if your product is like, $10,000 and they expect to receive a financial outcome of $8,000, they're probably not going to be a good fit, right? How do you drive results? This is a big one. Is it relational marketing or transactional? That's part of the value proposition. Competitors gives you industry knowledge, what platforms, how much time and money you're currently spending so you can create value, and then where you'd like to be, something aspirational. And then if you want to take it up another level, who here knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? What is it, like to the best of your knowledge?
I took AP Psych, so that's what I know it from. So
Yeah.
it was kind of a hierarchy of what you need to have to be, I think like at peace, but like self-actualization is the main thing you're working towards. So that's making sure that everything in the bottom parts of the triangles are met in order to get to the top.
Yeah, nope, that's perfect. Yeah, it's the psychological concept that you start with these kind of base needs, and then as you go up the hierarchy, you get closer and closer to actualization, self-esteem, all of that stuff. And so what we did is we took it and we applied it to basically our marketing and discovery questions. And if you want to level up, you can actually get a little bit higher, where instead of thinking about how you're going to sell to the end audience, you're figuring out what's valuable to the client, not just the outcome that they're looking for. So if you look at physiological needs, what does the company need to market? Safety and security, what outcome are they responsible for? Love and belonging, what does this project say about their team or company? Self-esteem, how do they want to make this look to their peers, make them look to their peers or higher up? And then the self-actualization, what type of work have they always wanted to work on? And so if you think about if you're selling to a middle market manager within an organization, how do they want to look to their higher ups? And then if you're selling to somebody who's a decision maker, what's the type of work that they've always dreamed of doing and how they want to be perceived? So a little tangible example of that is we did a video for Rose Holman last year that I'll go more into when I talk about our process. But this is an example of how we use kind of that process to create these emotional anchors that we use later to rein in the client. So we helped them simplify the idea down to its essence. So the video they wanted was a video to showcase that Rose Holman has a vibrant on-campus culture. And then we wanted to pinpoint the emotion, which what emotional arc do they want the audience to go on? And for Rose Holman is they wanted to really capture a student's experience of community on campus. That was the emotion they wanted to evoke. And then to understand what they're really saying is what does the stakeholder actually really care about in the outcome outside of just metrics, basically. And in this case, Santana was really interested in having a video that stood out from other videos that were in higher education. So our emotional anchors that we'd use later on to help rein in and keep the project on track was that the video was about having a vibrant on-campus culture, capturing the student's experience, and the video really needed to stand out compared to what other higher education colleges were doing. So the next step is process. We have this tension in the marketing creative world between needing a rigorous kind of structure to keep things moving and then people coming to us for our spontaneity, our creativity, our expression. I like to kind of apply it to cooking, right? The more you cook, the better you get, the less you have to follow a recipe because the more skills you understand. And it's the same way with the process where there's a paradox, which is the more structured the process you have, the more freedom you actually have to create because process creates clarity for you and your client. I was just talking with a CEO actually about sales stuff and he was trying to figure out how to understand, he had very much founder-led sales, trying to understand how to continue to grow what he was doing. And he was like, well, everything I do is so simple, I really need to figure out how I need to experiment on it. So why would I spend time really recording all of the stuff that I'm already doing? And I was like, well, because if you can put everything in a box that's already part of your current process, you know where you can put your energy into experimentation. And it's the same thing in the creative process. If you know where the boundaries are of your creative process, then you know where you can put all of the experimentation energy and where you can let your client be a little bit, chaotic. Why process, or what process provides is it gives you bumpers that guide the project and protect the creative focus. It creates safe zones for exploration, discovery, and change. And then it gives clarity and confidence for both you and your client, and then breathing room because you know where those changes are going to come. So I'll walk you through our process really quick, just to give you an idea of what like a more complex creative process looked like, something like what we did with Intersection for the Muncie stuff. And I'll be using that Rose Hallman video as kind of an example. So our process follows about 9 steps. We have the discovery, concept mood boards, scripting, storyboard style frames, voiceover and music, animatic, and then animation. So we start with the discovery, and we start with all of those kind of lessons I was talking about of having like really rigorous communication discovery, so we understand what the outcome is, both emotionally and practically, so that when we pitch them on the concepts, we're actually hitting the mark for them. We usually start with a scope discovery where we pitch a few different animation styles based on complexity and find a style that meets their budgeting needs, basically. One of the cool things about animation is it's almost infinitely scalable up and down to a point where you can have very complex animation, you can have very simple iconographical, and you can accomplish very similar marketing outcomes using animation of different complexities. Then we move into concepts. So this is where we had talked about, initially they came to us and they said, we just want to show off the on-campus culture, and they wanted to show a student's 4-year experience at Rose. And so during the concept process, we came to the conclusion that we wanted to follow actually 3 different students' fictional journeys. They didn't want to do something anecdotal through the 3 different tracks at Rose Hallman, which were engineering, sustainability, and then the medical tract. Then we move to mood boards, which is the beginning of the process where we begin to develop a visual language. So instead of trying to verbally communicate what they're interested in or look like, we just send them a bunch of images, and then it begins the conversation of what type of visual language they want to go after. After that, we go into the script and the storyboard, and so you can see here we start developing the characters, we start doing the storyboard. We tend to do storyboards in color because it reduces the amount of miscommunication with clients. If I had $1 for every time we would send a storyboard or an animatic, and the client would be like, why is it so jumpy, or why does it look so sketchy? I probably have $10, but it's just trying to reduce miscommunication. So you see we have the script, working through the script, all of that stuff. Then we move into style. This is where you see the first look at the final frame, basically. So as you see, this is kind of towards the end of the style discovery process, where they wanted us to move the colors away from some of the warmer colors and just wanted to keep it really red, white, and gray within the Rose Hallman brand. And then they also wanted us to de-age some of these characters and make them look a little bit more college age. So you see some of that, like those final steps. Then we do voiceover and music. We have a couple different services for that. And then we move to the animatic, where this is where we take the storyboard, the voiceover, and the music, and we just put it to time, basically. It's kind of like a, almost like an animated storyboard or like a glorified slideshow.
So you're thinking about a degree in engineering, science, or math. You probably have a lot of questions. Will it be difficult? Will I be part of a community? Will I make an impact? At Rose Hallman, our goal is to give our students the world's best STEM education in an environment of individual attention and support.
And then, after we do the animatic, we move into the final animation.
So you're thinking about a degree in engineering, science, or math. You probably have a lot of questions. Will it be difficult? Will I be part of a community? Will I make an impact? At Rose Hallman, our goal is to give our students the world's best STEM education in an environment of individual attention and support, all while achieving over 98% job placement after graduation.
So the important part of process is really, it's like we're kind of in this interesting position where we have this balance between being like Henry Ford and Jackson Pollock, where we want to know where to protect the creativity, but also where the process needs to come in and give those bumpers. So think about in your process where the hill is you want to die on, and then where you need to be more rigorous with your process. So what I wanted to ask was, well, actually first, in our process, these are some of the key points that we found are really important for us. Generally speaking, we like to say in the animation world, it's like the 80-20 rule, where about 80% of the calendar time is spent from the discovery process through the animatic, with only 20% being spent in animation production, but the scope is inverted where only about 20% of the budget is spent from discovery to animatic, and then about 80% of the budget is spent when we put all of our animators on it. So we've pinpointed that specifically concept and mood boards, scripting and storyboards, some of these are that way as well, but mostly these are where most of the creative juice happens, where a lot of the freedom can be. So I would love to ask Brandon or Zach in Intersection, where in your guys' process do you see like, hey, this is really where we try to focus on the creativity, or this is where we should put up some more boundaries?
Good question.
I mean, I think earliest point is our creative brief process, where we go through discovery and we go through a sales discovery, but then when we get the client in the room and really laser focus in whatever the project is, we develop a creative brief that captures everything. And for us, that's kind of that first point of we have to get this right in order to be able to do the creative from there. I would say that's the very first point that we're pretty non-negotiable.
Right,
Yeah.
and that brief serves as our kind of foundational document, that provides those bumpers and that structure to understand like what all the creative needs to be tied back to.
Yeah.
But then that also gives us, like you said, the jumping off point to understand, you know, we have these list of tones that we need to achieve, or we have these audiences we need to reach. And that's our foundational elements of understanding who we're talking to and how we want to talk. But of course, there's a lot of different ways to interpret that visually. So that gives us a good starting point to try different things that still achieve this brief, but allow us to go in different directions of how that could come to life. And so that kind of next first like concepting step after the creative brief is where like we have the most kind of freedom of creativity to kind of figure out what the direction is. And then once we kind of decide what that direction is, the rest of the elements then kind of all follow down that path. And so you're a little bit more of building out and expanding that path's design rather than going back and figuring out new ideas at that point. So getting that foundational element is super important, and then using that as a starting point for different directions that we then whittle down to figure out what the correct one is for that project.
Well, and I think it's also helpful to create those bumpers with the clients too, because it kind of just creates, you know, boundaries of when we deliver some of the creative stuff to refer back to it and be like, this is why we made this decision because of what we talked about here and kind of, you know, how you wanted to be presented and
Yeah, and help them understand that their time to be involved in that process is this specific time.
Yeah.
And then once we reached a vision, now we're all on the same train and we can't get off the tracks.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Where
think
is
it
that?
helps setting that 80-20, you know, expectation, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Inevitably, there are changes that come down that path, but that's not the time to, you know what, we're ditching blue, we're going red. That's not, because that changes a lot, you know?
Yeah.
It changes more than it sounds, so making sure in our process that those are really critical milestones and why we do it is, you know, that communication up front. And
Do you guys have like, for us, our point of like no return basically is the animatic. Once we have all the stakeholders on the animatic, we're like, hey, everything is agreed, and then all the revisions after that are like minor animation revisions within what you guys do. I know you guys have more services necessarily than what we offer, but do you have like a clear point of no return, or is it a little bit more like amorphous?
I think in the case of websites, we have what we call the vibe check, and once the vibe check is approved, then we build the whole website based on that. And really what the vibe check is we build kind of like the animatic, a live version of like their homepage and maybe an interior page or two, but not the whole site. And so they get a chance to see how the menu works or see how animations are planned or anything like that. And then, you know, if we have to add something, take something from the menu after, those are really minor, but to change how the menu works or looks at the very end is a lot bigger of an impact. So I do believe it's kind of based on whatever the service is, when that moment is. Even in the project that we just did with you, the video, we gave the client kind of very specific times for feedback and kind of guided them along the way, like, hey, now's the time, if we're adjusting the script, this is it, right? And now's the time, you know, for voiceover or theme, this is it. Because we knew at some point we can't change the animation style, we can't change certain things.
That's great.
And we've added those kind of aspects of our website process into other projects as well, especially like larger scale things. So when we were working on like a larger scale print piece, like we just did a 72-page magazine for a client. So we did a vibe check for that too, where we're like, here's an example of what a spread section would look like. And if we get like kind of buy-in on that before we spend time building out a 72-page magazine, and then all of a sudden they're like, actually I don't like the style of this at all. So we don't want to waste time either for us or for them. And so even on like social media, there's checkpoints where it's like, all right, we're building out a calendar for the next 3 months, here's some topics, and we get buy-in on topics from clients, and then we start working on kind of the creative as far as the content for that, right? All right, here's some buy-in time for that, what's your feedback on this before we start scheduling it? And so we've kind of taken what was originally built out for this website process and found ways to apply steps of it to our more like kind of traditional and new media projects as well.
But I think what we've learned is kind of like you said, there's a point of no return. During that process, that's when we need to try to get 80 or more % of the client's feedback and buy-in.
Yeah.
And so communication is really key, and sometimes you're doing more touch points with the client at that point. But as you kind of learn with marketing and creative, once they feel like you've heard them and they see themselves into that a little bit, then it's usually, hey, the trust is there, and
Yep.
then they go.
Yeah, definitely. That's super effective. That's super interesting.
I was thinking too, like, you were talking about the sales process, there's still also like the non-negotiable part of the process. Before anything goes to like a proposal or a contract, I have a specific part of the process where I relay to them what I heard, here's your pain points, here's these things.
Yep.
Because if I don't have that right, there's no point in spending time in a contract.
Yeah.
They take a lot of time, there's always the terms and conditions, you don't wanna go over all that, you wanna make sure that they buy into that we understand their project. And I was even thinking through, I think Tom's example, he's got to pitch a book, figuring out, the publishers or whoever you're working with, what they care about and how does your book fit into that is a big part of that discovery and research process.
Yeah.
But you gotta make sure they are in agreement before you ever go down, here's
Yeah.
the quote.
That's a great point. Like using that active listening and then communicating back. That's super effective, and that's a great point. I think that's something we should incorporate in what we do as well. The final part, which is the humility, which is keeping clients on track. So you've learned how, you've curated your communication. You've scripted what you're going to talk about. You've spent time thinking about that. You've built a rigorous process that you can take your clients through. What do you do when 3/4 of the way through, they just decide to abandon everything that you agreed upon and throw everything at the wall and go back exactly to what they were doing before? It's a tough place to be. I feel like we've all been there. And a few kind of tips for that. One is one that I talked about a lot, which is the using emotional anchoring, which is, for example, in that Rose Hallman piece, right? When they come to us and they say, hey, we want to add call-outs to basically every single frame of the piece because this dean said that this needed to be in here and there's a new program going on here and there's a new thing here. We could come back and say, hey, we think that you should not use call-outs because you want to create an experience and that will ruin the experience. And it'll also get in the way of showing the campus that you're paying us so much to animate. And also, it's just going to make the video stand out less. So creating those emotional anchors, just like to your point, gives you those things that you can go back to later that helps kind of ease the blow of saying no. Another thing is working on your contract. That's something that we've done a lot of work on is, like an example here is, we've tried to include almost every step in our animation process in our contract and our schedule, as well as the approvals that we get, so that if somebody were to come back and say, hey, we already got the approval on this, we're moving on, or it's now out of scope. The one thing that's the most important though, almost more important than everything else, is being willing to say no. Does anybody in here like saying no to a client? Right? Yeah, it sucks. It's like the worst. And I wish I liked saying no sometimes because it would make my job a lot easier. But the problem is if you say yes to everything, the client never knows that there's a problem. and they never know that that they're causing a problem, and so they think everything is going great. And then by the time they get a watered down thing, it's like 6 months later, and they realize, well, this just feels like exactly what we did before. I'm not really getting any new results. Then you don't get referrals, and they don't work with you again. So you have to be willing to say no. And I like your point, Brandon. One of the ways I like to do it is redirecting, where instead of just saying, no, that's a bad idea, basically using the active listening to repeat what they said back to you, and then just ascribe something that you're already doing to the problem that they've brought up. They're like, oh, we should do this. And then you say, oh, I think we should do that, but we're going to do it this way. And it's something that's already part of your process, basically, or something that's much more in line with your process. So in summation, great work doesn't happen by accident. It takes your ideas, your process, and then humility to lead the clients well. And if you pitch with clarity and you protect your structure, you can build with trust, and everybody wins. And you'll be able to sell more work, do better work, and have a bunch of really happy clients at the end. So thanks so much.